They said she had it all: beauty, grace, elegance. The kind of woman fairy tales are written about. But what they didn't know was how quickly a dream could curdle into a nightmare. On the night of her wedding, a night that should have been dipped in golden memories, Emma Whitmore stood alone in a mansion soaked in silence. Her husband, the charming, mysterious billionaire who had promised to shield her from the harshness of the world, walked into their bedroom, not with passion, but with poison. What he said next shattered every illusion she had ever held about love. He hadn't married her for love. He hadn't even married her for companionship. He had married her for revenge. And suddenly the diamond ring on her finger felt like a shackle. But here's the twist. Behind every calculated betrayal lies a hidden truth. And behind every man hardened by hate is a heart waiting to break. This is not just a love story. It's a story of vengeance, resilience, and redemption. A tale that asks, can you truly heal the heart of the man who broke yours? And more importantly, should you? Stay with us, because this story doesn't just twist, it spirals. It descends into betrayal and rises toward forgiveness in ways you'll never expect. And by the end, you might just find yourself asking, if you were in Emma's shoes, would you have the strength to walk away or the courage to stay? Welcome to John's Stories channel, where romantic tales are brought to life with heart and soul. Immerse yourself in a world of emotions, where every voice brings you closer to heartfelt, unforgettable love stories. If you enjoy romantic audio stories, don't forget to subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey. Emma Whitmore had grown up believing in love the way others believed in gravity, something constant, something real. Raised in the aristocratic halls of her family's estate, she had been taught poise, dignity, and the delicate art of endurance. But nothing could have prepared her for Nathaniel Cross. Nathaniel was not just a man. He was a presence, a billionaire entrepreneur with eyes like a thunderstorm and a demeanor that made people lean in when he spoke. He first entered her life during a charity gala, a shimmering night of champagne and shallow conversations. She had been standing awkwardly by a statue of some long-forgotten general, feigning interest, when she felt someone watching her. "You don't seem to be enjoying the event," came a voice beside her, deep, composed, like it didn't belong in the same room as these idle elites. Emma turned, and there he was, tall, sharply dressed, with a face so striking it seemed painted in shadows and steel. She tried to offer a polite smile, the kind she'd mastered, but the words caught in her throat. He was intense, and when their eyes met, it was like the moment before lightning strikes, quiet, electric, and terrifyingly unpredictable. From that moment on, Nathaniel became a fixture in her life. Flowers arrived without cards. He'd show up at her family's dinners, their business events, always with the same enigmatic charm. To outsiders, he was the perfect suitor. To Emma, he was a riddle she wanted desperately to solve. Her parents adored him, and why wouldn't they? The Whitmores had been on the verge of financial ruin, their company bleeding money after a string of risky investments. Nathaniel's interest in their daughter had felt like divine intervention. With his wealth and reputation, he could restore everything they had lost. It wasn't just about love, it was about legacy. But Emma did love him, or at least she thought she did. Every detail of his attention, every carefully placed compliment, every meaningful glance made her believe she was seen in a way no one else had ever managed. When he proposed, during a stormy night, rain sliding down the windows of a private suite, it wasn't really a question. He didn't ask. He told her, "Emma, I want you to be my wife." She said yes. Of course she did. Because at that point, saying no would have felt like stepping off the edge of the only world she knew. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle, held in an opulent cathedral adorned with cascading white roses, shimmering crystal chandeliers, and paparazzi flashing from every angle. Emma wore a dress that floated like mist, lace, silk, and hope stitched into every seam. Nathaniel, in his black tailored suit, looked like something from another era, confident, composed, a king claiming his queen. But even then, in the briefest flicker of his expression, Emma caught something else. A shadow behind his smile, a clenched jaw, an invisible wall. She ignored it. She told herself it was just nerves. Everyone gets nervous on their wedding day. And maybe that was true. But nerves didn't explain what happened after. That night, in the honeymoon suite designed to cradle a new beginning, Emma waited. Candles glowed softly. Rose petals were strewn across the bed in cliché but beautiful patterns. She had changed into a pale blue silk robe, her hands trembling slightly, her heart racing not with fear but anticipation. And then he walked in. Nathaniel didn't smile, didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, his hands buried in his jacket pockets, staring at her like she was a painting he didn't remember commissioning. "It's late," he finally said. Emma smiled, trying to melt the tension. "Yes, but it's our first night as husband and wife." He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled off his jacket and tossed it over a chair, loosened his tie, walked past her. "Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. And then he turned, and everything changed. "You really believed this, didn't you?" His tone was bitter, sharp, and cold enough to pierce bone. Emma's heart dropped. "Believed what?" "The fairy tale, the perfect romance, that I ever loved you." Those words hit her like a slap. She couldn't speak, barely breathe. "This marriage," he continued, stepping closer, "was never about love. It was about revenge." Emma backed away, the blood draining from her face. "I don't understand." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Your father destroyed mine, drove him into bankruptcy, humiliated him so completely that he took his own life." She gasped, her entire body trembling. "You didn't know?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Of course you didn't. The Whitmores don't deal in consequences, just profit." Emma shook her head, too stunned to speak. And then he said the words that would haunt her forever. "So now you get to suffer." Emma stood frozen in the candlelight, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her soul. It wasn't just what Nathaniel said, it was how he said it. Without hesitation, without mercy, as if her very existence was an offense he had waited years to punish. She tried to make sense of it, her mind racing, grasping for any memory, any moment that might have hinted at his hatred. But there was nothing. No red flags, no sharp words, only the flawless illusion of love. And now that illusion was crumbling right in front of her. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter," he replied flatly. "You carry his name. That's enough." This moment, this shattering of everything she thought she knew, is something that many people, especially women, quietly live through. When the person you trust the most reveals that the trust was never mutual. In real life, it might not be about revenge, but manipulation, control, or some hidden agenda. And often it's only when you're already bound, by marriage, by children, by shared lives, that the mask slips. Emma was no exception, but what she did next would set her apart. She didn't collapse into tears. She didn't scream or beg. She simply stood there, her heart breaking in silence, as Nathaniel turned and walked out of the room, leaving her in the soft glow of what was supposed to be their beginning. That night, Emma didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding gown, staring at the ring on her finger. A ring that now felt like a trap. The petals on the bed mocked her. Every stitch of her dress, every diamond in her necklace, all whispered the same thing. You were played. In the days that followed, Emma wandered the mansion like a ghost. Nathaniel didn't hurt her physically. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. He barely looked at her, barely acknowledged her presence, and when he did, it was with the same icy detachment as a man reading stock numbers. She tried to speak to him once, in the dining room over breakfast. He didn't even glance up from his paper. This is the thing about emotional abuse. It's subtle. It's not always screaming matches or bruises. Sometimes it's the absence of kindness, the deliberate indifference, the calculated withholding of affection. And it chips away at you until you start questioning your own worth. But even in that darkness, something inside Emma began to shift. She noticed things. The way Nathaniel would pause for just a second when he saw her crying. The way he had the gardeners replant the rose bushes she liked. The way he hesitated before shutting his office door. Small, almost imperceptible signs that beneath his armor, something wasn't as dead as he pretended. Still, she refused to be a prisoner of someone else's unresolved trauma. So one evening, with a defiance she hadn't felt in weeks, she confronted him again, this time in his study. I want the truth, she said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind her. He didn't turn to look at her. I already gave you the truth. No, she replied. You gave me pain. I want the full story. I want to know what my father did. I want to understand. For the first time, he turned. His expression was guarded, but not unreadable. He destroyed my family, he said quietly. My father trusted him, went into a business deal with him. Your father pulled out at the last moment, tanking the entire project and letting ours take the fall. My dad lost everything. His company, his reputation, his pride. And when the banks came knocking, when the media crucified him, he couldn't take it. Nathaniel's voice faltered. He jumped from the roof of our house. My mother found him. I was 16. Emma's stomach twisted. She'd grown up hearing her father talk about ruthless negotiations, the necessary cruelty of business, but she had never imagined the human cost behind those deals. I'm sorry, she said softly. It doesn't change anything, he muttered. No, she said, but it should. There was a long silence between them, one thick with unspoken pain. And maybe in that moment, he saw her not as a symbol of his revenge, but as a woman, tangled in the web of someone else's sins just like him. Later that night, she found herself walking alone in the garden. The wind was sharp, slicing through her thin coat, but she welcomed it. It was the first time she had felt anything in days. You'll catch a cold, Nathaniel said from behind. She didn't turn. I prefer the cold. He didn't reply. Just stood there in silence, watching her. And this time it wasn't the cold stare of vengeance. It was something else. Something conflicted. That night marked the beginning of a strange in-between. Nathaniel stopped ignoring her, but he didn't engage either. They existed like two planets caught in the same orbit, but spinning on different axes. Sometimes Emma would catch him watching her when she thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late. Emma had fallen asleep in the library, curled up on the couch with a book in her lap. She didn't hear the door open, didn't see Nathaniel step inside, but she felt it when he lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bedroom. She felt the warmth of his hands, the tremor in his breath. she felt something real. He didn't speak, just laid her down gently and pulled the blanket over her. But he stood there for a long time afterward, watching her sleep. People often say that love and hate are two sides of the same coin, that they burn with the same intensity, that one can bleed into the other. And maybe that's what was happening. Maybe Nathaniel's rage was giving way to the very thing he had tried so hard to suppress. Because the next night, it happened. It wasn't planned, it wasn't soft, it wasn't even kind. But it was real. He kissed her, hard, desperate, as if trying to erase every line between revenge and desire. Emma resisted at first. She pushed against his chest, but then something inside her broke too. She had spent so long being unloved, unseen, and now in the heat of that moment, they were both stripped of their lies. They made love with the intensity of two people who had been drowning in silence. And for a brief, fleeting moment, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. But fairy tales don't rewrite themselves in one night. The next morning, Nathaniel was cold again, formal, distant. He wouldn't look at her, wouldn't speak. And when she asked if what happened meant anything, he simply replied, "Don't mistake a moment of weakness for something meaningful." Those words cut deeper than any lie. Emma didn't cry, not this time. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet resolve, she said, "Then I'm done being weak too." Emma didn't slam the door when she left the bedroom. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene. That wasn't her style anymore. She had learned something powerful in that moment. That silence can be louder than rage, and dignity can sting more than revenge. Nathaniel didn't follow her. Maybe he thought she was bluffing. Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe, deep down, he feared the part of himself that had begun to want her. She spent the following days in quiet preparation. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She packed. Slowly. Thoughtfully. She called her mother, discreetly, from the far end of the estate garden where the security cameras didn't reach. Her mother's voice trembled on the phone, not with fear, but with a kind of knowing sadness. She had always suspected the cross marriage wasn't built on love, but like many high society mothers, she had chosen to hope for the best. "A car will be waiting by the east gate, before sunrise. Just go. Don't say goodbye." Emma closed her eyes, nodded silently to herself, and whispered, "Thank you." We often think of escape as something messy, midnight fights, bags thrown out of windows. But sometimes, the most powerful escapes are the quietest. Emma made no dramatic declarations. She didn't leave a note. She simply stopped engaging. The house became a shell again, except this time, she wasn't the one haunted. It was Nathaniel who began to feel the silence. He noticed her absence even before she left. Her eyes no longer searched for his. She no longer flinched when he walked into a room. She didn't try to fix anything. And that disturbed him. Control was what Nathaniel had always relied on. Not just over her, but over himself, over his businesses, his image, the narrative he crafted so meticulously. But now, the woman he had lured into a cage was no longer rattling the bars. She was simply planning to leave. He couldn't explain the tension in his chest every time she passed him without a word. He told himself it was frustration, annoyance, wounded pride. But none of those things explained why he lingered outside her bedroom door some nights, wondering if she still cried herself to sleep. And then, She was gone. The bed was made. The drawers were half open. Her favorite scarf was missing from the coat rack. Nathaniel walked into the room and knew instantly she had left him. At first, he stood frozen. For a man who controlled billion-dollar empires, who commanded boardrooms and press rooms with equal ease, he looked helpless. There was no one to shout at, no one to blame. Only the echo of his own mistakes. He ran through the hallways calling her name. His voice, once cold and commanding, cracked with something raw, desperation. But the house gave him no answers. Out on the front steps, he stared at the horizon, watching the dawn break over the fields, and realized the sun was rising without her. For the first time, Nathaniel Cross experienced true loss. Not business, not money, but the loss of someone he never admitted he needed until it was too late. And this is where real-life lessons punch hardest. There's a strange thing that happens to people who chase revenge. In the process of trying to inflict pain, they often forget the point and lose sight of who they used to be. Real people live like this, too. There's the parent who spends their whole life proving they were right, only to lose the child in the process. The partner who punishes their spouse for years, only to wake up alone. Nathaniel Cross became a metaphor for those who let their pain justify everything until they lose the one thing that could have actually healed them. Emma wasn't thinking about any of that when she left. Her heart wasn't filled with triumph or vindication. It was simply exhausted. She looked out the window of the car as the mansion faded in the distance and whispered to herself, "Never again." What she didn't expect, what she didn't prepare for, was the future growing inside her. It started with nausea, fatigue, the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from emotional burnout, but something deeper. She bought a test, alone, in a small pharmacy in a sleepy little town. And there, in the dim light of a guest house bathroom, Emma found out she was pregnant. The air left her lungs, not in fear, but in something closer to disbelief. Of all the cruel twists in her story, this one felt the most unreal. She had walked away from the man who broke her, but now, a part of him was inside her. At first, she considered hiding it forever, never telling him, protecting her child from the weight of that legacy. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Months passed, her body changed, her face softened. Strangers began smiling at her in grocery stores, offering seats at cafes. There's a glow that pregnant women carry, an unspoken signal to the world that life is beginning again. She moved into a cottage at the edge of town. Her mother visited often, always bringing something warm, a blanket, soup, hope. And for a while, Emma felt safe. But Nathaniel Cross was not the kind of man who let go easily. He hired investigators, quietly, discreetly. He combed through every trace of her departure until one afternoon, a photo landed on his desk. Emma, on a bench beneath a tree, hand on her belly, face half hidden in a sun hat. He didn't breathe for a full minute. Pregnant. His. He drove himself. No entourage, no security. Just a man with a storm inside him, and a secret he had no idea how to confront. When he saw her in person,
Sitting quietly with a book in her lap, the world narrowed. Her stomach had curved into a clear sign of life, and she radiated peace in a way he had never seen before. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know how to ask for something he had never given. Forgiveness. When she saw him, her entire posture shifted. The book dropped. Her hand instinctively cradled her belly. Her eyes sharpened like a blade. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He couldn't speak at first, could only stare. "You're pregnant," he finally said. "That's none of your business," she snapped. "But it's mine, isn't it?" His voice trembled slightly. She didn't answer with words, but her eyes did. For a brief second, he saw it. The flicker of truth. And then the wall went back up. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't deserve to know." Those words, so simple, so cutting, hit Nathaniel harder than any betrayal ever had. This was the cost, not just of revenge, but of being too proud to admit you were wrong. When she tried to walk past him, he grabbed her wrist. "Don't touch me," she said, yanking herself free. "Don't come near us again." And just like that, she was gone again. He stood alone in the wind, the tree branches rustling above him like the whisper of fate. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't about punishment anymore. This wasn't about losing her. He had already lost her. This was about losing the chance to ever be a part of the child's life. The child that was his only shot at redemption.
In the days that followed, Nathaniel Cross was a shadow of his former self. He wasn't the commanding CEO anymore, not the strategic mastermind who once orchestrated billion-dollar mergers over breakfast. That version of him had collapsed the moment he saw Emma's swollen belly and realized she had built a future without him. Now, he was just a man, a broken one, haunted not by what had been done to him, but by what he had done in return. He tried to reach her. He went back to that town again and again, waited outside her house, hoping she might speak to him, might soften. But every time, the door stayed shut. Her gaze through the window, if it came at all, was distant and cold, a warning. He had hurt her too deeply for apologies to mean anything now. Still, he didn't give up. He sent letters, flowers, donations to women's shelters in her name. She returned them all. And then, just when fate could not have felt more cruel, Emma's life was threatened in the most terrifying way imaginable. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind of evening where the air hangs heavy and even the silence feels uneasy. Emma had gone out for a walk, her hands protectively cradling her stomach, her thoughts drifting to the name she might give her son. She'd felt more peace recently, as if she had finally carved out a sliver of serenity in her broken story. But peace, like trust, is easily shattered. From the shadows of the narrow street, 3 men emerged. "Miss Whitmore," one of them said, in a voice that carried too much familiarity. The tone wasn't of courtesy, it was threat dressed as civility. She backed away instinctively. "We just want to talk," said another, but the look in their eyes said otherwise. Emma turned to run. They lunged. One grabbed her wrist and another stepped in front of her path. Panic shot through her like electricity. Her heart wasn't racing just for herself now. It was racing for the life inside her. She screamed. And then, out of the darkness, he came.
Nathaniel. No guards, no driver, just him. Like a storm breaking through a dying sky. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and lethal. The men hesitated, but not for long. One of them pulled a weapon. In a split second, Nathaniel did what he hadn't done when she left. He stepped forward, without fear, without calculation. He shielded her. The shot rang out like the crack of a world breaking. Emma screamed again as his body fell against hers, the force of the bullet tearing through his shoulder, knocking him to the ground. She dropped to her knees, cradling him, her hands pressed against the spreading blood. He looked up at her with eyes not filled with vengeance, but with something deeper, something final. "I always loved you," he whispered, voice ragged, "from the very first day." And then he passed out. The paramedics came fast. The street flashed red and blue, sirens cutting through the dark as they loaded him into the ambulance. Emma rode beside him, silent, gripping his hand like it was the only thing keeping her from falling back into the abyss. At the hospital, the night was endless. White lights, beeping machines, doctors in hushed, urgent voices, and Emma, covered in blood that wasn't hers, sat in the corner of the waiting room, her arms wrapped around her belly, rocking slightly, as if trying to protect her son from the chaos of the outside world. Hours passed. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just stared. It's strange how moments like this redefine everything. What you thought mattered suddenly dissolves. Petty grudges, old scars, pride, fear, it all becomes irrelevant when someone you love is on the edge of death. That's when she realized she had never stopped loving Nathaniel, not even through the betrayal, not even through the silence. When a nurse finally appeared and said he was alive, but in a coma, Emma let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. She asked to see him. The room was cold and still. Machines clicked and hissed quietly in rhythm with his pulse. Nathaniel lay pale, unmoving, a man suspended between two worlds. She stood at his bedside and took his hand. It was warm, but limp, like holding a memory. "I love you," she said, not needing him to be awake to hear it. "I tried not to. I really did." The tears came then, heavy and honest, soaking the sheets as she laid her forehead against his hand. "I wanted to hate you. I told myself I did. But even when you left me alone, I never really was. Because every room I walked into, I hoped you would be there. Every time I dreamed, it was of you. And now I need you to fight." The machine beeped steadily. "Not for me, for him," she said, placing his hand gently on her belly. And maybe it was that. Maybe it was the contact. Maybe it was her voice. Or maybe love really does have the power to bring people back. Because his fingers twitched. Her breath caught. Then his eyelids flickered. And then, slowly, they opened. He blinked, confused. Then, like gravity pulling two stars into alignment, his gaze found hers. "Do you still love me?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Emma's face crumpled, not from pain this time, but from relief. "I want that future too," she replied. The recovery wasn't instant, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Nathaniel had to learn how to live without armor, without hate. He wasn't good at it, not at first. The pain was constant, not just in his body, but in his soul. Letting go of vengeance meant confronting the emptiness that had filled its place, and that was harder than any business negotiation. But Emma was always there, reading to him when he couldn't speak, holding his hand when the nightmares came, sitting beside him through physical therapy. Sometimes just breathing beside him was enough. And slowly, the man who had once destroyed her rebuilt himself, piece by fragile piece. It's easy to villainize people who hurt us, and sometimes they deserve it. But occasionally, when the damage is rooted in unresolved grief, the only way to move forward is not through punishment, but through healing. And healing is slow. It demands vulnerability. It requires surrender. One day, many months later, Nathaniel stood in the doorway of their new home, a modest farmhouse nestled in the countryside. Emma was on the porch, barefoot, sipping tea. The wind played with her dress, and the late afternoon sun framed her hair like a halo. He walked over and placed his hands on her growing belly. "Do you feel ready?" she asked. He looked at her, then down at where their child rested between them. "I don't know," he said, "but I feel home." She smiled. That night, Nathaniel sat at the edge of the bed, watching her sleep. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a ring. Not the original one, not the one given with lies, but a new one. Plain, simple, real. And when she opened her eyes, he held it out and said, "This time, I'm asking."
Emma stared at the new ring in Nathaniel's hand. It wasn't glittering with diamonds. It wasn't ostentatious or extravagant like the first. It was a simple gold band, one that spoke not of wealth, but of intention. "This time, I'm asking," he said again, more quietly. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but not the kind born from pain. These were tears of recognition, of understanding, of knowing that, finally, the man standing before her wasn't the one who had sought to ruin her, but the one who was willing to rebuild what he had shattered. "Yes," she whispered, her hands sliding into his, "but only if we promise to never be who we were before." He nodded. "We can't go back, but we can start right." That promise, spoken without vows or crowds or chandeliers, was the one that finally mattered. In the weeks that followed, they prepared for the arrival of their son together. The nursery was small, filled with second-hand furniture, and painted in calming tones of sky and cream. Nathaniel, once a man who could barely express emotion, learned how to fold tiny clothes and build a crib with his bare hands. And in those ordinary moments, measuring curtain rods, warming bottles, rubbing Emma's swollen feet, he began to understand what love actually looked like. It wasn't in the grand gestures. It was in showing up. When the baby came, it was a long labor. Emma gritted through it, breath by breath, pain by pain, with Nathaniel at her side the entire time. He never left the room. He never let go of her hand. And when their son was finally born, pink and wriggling, eyes blinking up at a world filled with uncertainty, Nathaniel held him against his chest and cried, for everything he had lost, for everything he had found, and for the man he now knew he wanted to be. They named him Leo, not after a family legacy or a billionaire ancestor, but after the Latin word for lion, a symbol of strength, of rebirth, of fierce, unyielding love. And for a time, life settled into something that resembled peace. Their farmhouse became a haven, not lavish, but alive. Emma filled the garden with flowers. Nathaniel took morning walks with Leo tucked in a sling against his chest. They laughed more, fought sometimes, but now every disagreement ended not in silence or exile, but in a conversation. Redemption, they learned, doesn't erase the past.
it redefines your future. But even as the years passed, the memory of what they had endured lingered, not like a scar, but like a map, a reminder of where they'd been, a blueprint of how far they'd traveled. One night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink like distant stars, Emma turned to him and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel knew what she meant. Not the marriage, not the child, but everything before, the pain, the vengeance, the lie. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I regret hurting you, but I don't regret where we are now. If pain was the only road to this, then maybe I had to walk it." Emma leaned her head on the shoulder. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. That Leo never grows up thinking love and hate can be the same thing." Nathaniel closed his eyes and breathed in the summer air, the sound of crickets in the distance, the faint murmur of their child sleeping through the baby monitor beside them. "I promise." Real-life love stories don't always start with butterflies and perfect dates. Some begin in darkness. Some are born from brokenness. Some take the long, hard road through betrayal, heartbreak, and silence before they ever reach understanding. What matters is what you do when you reach the end of that road. Nathaniel Cross and Emma Whitmore are fictional, but their story at its core is deeply human. Because in the real world, people hurt each other, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes with cold, calculated precision. Trauma becomes justification. Grief becomes weaponized, and the people closest to us often bear the brunt of our unresolved wounds. But also in the real world, people can change. Not everyone, not always, but some people, when confronted with the consequence of their cruelty, will choose to grow. And growth is a kind of miracle we don't talk about enough. Emma didn't win by saving Nathaniel. This isn't a savior narrative. She won by saving herself first, by walking away when staying meant surrendering her self-worth. And only after she did that, only after she stood firmly on her own, could she meet him again as an equal, not a victim. Nathaniel's transformation wasn't redemption through romance. It was accountability through love. He didn't win Emma back with gifts or grand apologies. He changed. His actions changed. He showed up when it mattered. He chose vulnerability over pride. And in doing so, he earned a second chance. In your own life, you may never experience betrayal on such a cinematic level, but the emotional parallels are universal. Maybe you've loved someone who used your trust as a weapon. Maybe you've been the one too proud to say sorry until it was too late. Or maybe, like Emma, you've stood at the crossroads, hurt, pregnant with possibility, and forced to choose whether to repeat the pain or rewrite the future. And the lesson? It's not just about who deserves a second chance. It's about who is willing to become someone new to earn it. Love doesn't fix broken people. But love, when it's strong, honest, and patient, can inspire someone to fix themselves. So ask yourself, are you holding on to pain that's keeping you from love? Are you punishing someone for a wound you've never examined? Are you letting your past dictate your future? If so, maybe today is the day to let go. Not for them, but for you. Because freedom isn't just walking away from someone else, it's walking back to yourself. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, challenged you, or made you see love differently, consider sharing it. You never know who might need to hear it right now. And as always, remember, the past may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. Love well, forgive slowly, and choose yourself, always. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection. And turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey.